Bretz Coven Attorney at Law, ইমিগ্রেশন ল সংক্রান্ত যে কোনো ধরনের সমস্যার সমাধানে আজই যোগাযোগ করুন।
আমাদের এখানে বাংলা ভাষা সহ আরো 15টি ভাষায় কথা বলা হয়।
প্রাক্তন ইমিগ্রেশন প্রসিকিউটর মিস্টার ব্রেটস দিবেন আপনাদের সকল প্রকার আইনি সহায়তা। যোগাযোগ 212-267-2555, 732-313-0075, bretzlaw.com।
দর্শক আমন্ত্রণ জানাচ্ছি ইমিগ্রেশন বিষয় অনুষ্ঠান ইউএস ইমিগ্রেশন উইথ ব্রেটস কোভেন LLP। আমাদের সাথে নিয়মিতভাবে আছেন মিস্টার ক্যারি অ্যান্ড মিস আইলিন। দর্শক আজ আমরা কথা বলবো জুভেনাইল ভিসা নিয়ে। চলুন দর্শক কথা বলি আমরা মিস্টার ক্যারি অ্যান্ড মিস আইলিনের সাথে। Mr. Carey, how are you?
I'm doing good, Zalman. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Ms. Eileen, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you. Let's talk about juvenile visa today. What is juvenile visa?
So there is a visa, and it's been in the news a lot lately. There is a visa for children, people who are under 21, who are here in the U.S. Doesn't matter how they got here.
Okay. Even though if it come through illegal borders or any, it doesn't matter.
Most of the children who apply for this is the way they come.
Okay.
And they need to demonstrate first in family court that they were abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both of their parents.
Okay.
And then they need a guardian.
Okay.
And so they go into family court.
I see.
With the guardian, and they basically say, look, this is the guardian. Court says, okay, we've checked it out. This guy seems like he can qualify as a guardian, and the court makes a special finding of the abuse, the abandonment, or the neglect. And then once they have that, they can file for a green card. There's been a lot of controversy about this program, starting with the flood of children that were coming here in the last year. Remember, there was a crisis on the border.
Right.
Obama was sending judges and ICE personnel down there.
Right.
And it wasn't all Southeast Asian kids. There were a lot of Central American,
right,
and South American. But there was a congressional hearing last week. And as a result of this, there is now a very large investigation going on, particularly in the Queens Family Court.
Why is that so?
For fraud. For fraud. And so, you know, this is the scenario that I think happens.
When you say
sometimes.
fraud, like what kind of a fraud are you talking?
Yeah. Well, basically, someone who's 18 or 19 says, yes, my parents neglected me and abused me, and I'm living with this guy from my community who's my guardian, but that guy is actually being paid by the parents to say all that.
So, okay.
So if the parents can afford to pay the guardian,
right.
You know, if the guardian's taking a fee to begin with, whether it's coming from the parents or anybody else,
right,
automatically there's a problem here.
Right.
The other fraud is, you know, they live in New Jersey, they work at a gas station in New Jersey, what they say they're living in Queens, you're going to high school there.
Oh.
All of these different frauds.
Basically, okay.
And so I think a couple of things about fraud, first of all. Historically, people have always tried to misrepresent things with immigration. And it is a crime. It's a crime. You can be arrested and prosecuted for it. So And we try very hard in our office to screen cases to make sure that they're real cases, because we certainly wouldn't want to bring a case that we know is fraudulent.
Right.
On the other hand, it's a great program for kids. You know, you have this situation that happens in Southeast Asia, it happens in Latin America. Kid hits 15 or 16, and the parents are poor, and they say, hey, if you don't get a job, you're out. We can't afford to feed you.
So if somebody's like about to reach 21 years old, what about for them? Like, let's say they already reached 21, just on the borderline, let's say.
So it becomes a little bit complicated. Actually, once you're over 18, it becomes complicated. And Eileen
so
can
it
talk
has
to
to
you about that a
be
little bit.
under 20, but 18 is...
Well, you know,
Depends
the
also
age
where
of
you are.
majority in the United States is the age of 18.
right.
So you'll get a lot of judges in different districts that'll say, okay, you've already been emancipated. You're an adult in the eyes of this country. So why are you here? Why do you need guardianship? Now, legally, they can get a guardian up to the age of 21 and even beyond if there's some kind of mental deficiency in the applicant. In this case, in New Jersey, all of the family courts have agreed over 18, they're not going to issue guardianship, and they're definitely not making any special findings because they feel you're already an adult.
So it's only New Jersey.
In New Jersey so far that we're aware of. I mean, there may be other districts and states that have this issue as well. In New York, they will look at it on a case-by-case basis. There'll be some over 18 that they feel have been emancipated. They've graduated high school. They've been living on their own. They've been working. And now you're trying to live with a guardian, and they'll say, okay, this doesn't fit. But what's most important is between 18 and 21, that's when you need to have the guardian appointed, and you need to be able to find the special findings, as Carrie already mentioned. Abuse, abandonment, and neglect. If you get that before you're 21, you still need to file with immigration before your 21st birthday. So we've seen a couple instances. A gentleman came to me. He got it the day before he turned 21. The next day, his lawyer filed it. Sorry, too late.
Too late.
Immigration didn't receive it before you hit 21.
But we had a nice experience. Was it last Christmas? Or it was a Christmas before, I think.
It was the
out
Christmas
in
before,
the
Riverhead.
Hamptons or Riverhead, way out in Long Island. We had gone to court a couple of times, and the person was going to age out, I think, like
New Year's Eve.
New Year's Eve.
Okay.
And the court actually, I think, was it New Year's Eve or a couple
No,
of
they
days before that?
approved it on December 24th. But then there was all these holidays in between. He had only one day to come in so for us to file it before he would have aged out.
But that court was very accommodating. Not all the courts are like that. So because of this recent set of allegations that there is a lot of fraud in this area, we know that just in the last week when we were in Queens Family Court, there was a lot of scrutiny on the guardians, a lot of scrutiny. And so, look, it's a great program. If you're a juvenile in the
It's a simple
US,
way to say it. The juvenile visa, it's for them who's under 21, but around 18, and who's people who has been neglected or abused.
yeah, that's
basically
that's correct.
To summarize it, like
Well, we have 5-year-olds that fall into this category.
How?
The reason why we're focusing, they've been abused, abandoned, or
but
neglected.
how the 5 years old cannot go to the court? Let's say both of the parents are being abused by by their father and mother. I mean, 5 years.
No.
It's only one parent needs to be the abuser or a neglector or
Okay.
the...
What about both of them? If there's any case.
Well, I mean, we can get into a debate on it. I'm just saying the eligibility. If
Okay.
there's a child
Right.
who's been abused, abandoned, or neglected,
By one
they're
parent.
eligible.
They're okay.
Right. They
Okay.
don't have to be 18,
18.
Zaman.
As long as they can recognize.
Family
Okay.
courts will entertain applications made from children, and that's why children have guardians, and that's why people have representation. And so,
For me to ask you a question, just to have the audience, the idea that what we actually talking about. What is juvenile visa? Because some people get wrong impression. So just to clarify it, that a child is abused by whether father or mother can apply for a juvenile visa.
yeah, basically, a juvenile visa is a self-petition. The person can petition for themselves to get a green card
Right.
if they get those prerequisites from a family court.
Right.
And so the issue now that's becoming so much under scrutiny is, was the applicant really neglected, abused, and abandoned? And these terms are not so clearly defined. Abuse, we understand what abuse is.
Right.
Neglect, it depends upon how you want to define that. But if your father says to you, hey, we can't afford you anymore, so get a job or get out.
Okay.
And this happens in a lot of poor areas around the world. That, to me, is abandonment.
Right.
But the key is to be clear with the court and not to be making something up. And it's not abandonment if you're saying that, but somehow or another, someone has managed to get money to the guardian for the guardian to say, yes, I'm going to be your guardian.
And to go a little further on that, I went to family court on cases, and the judge will ask, okay, you've been abused, abandoned, or neglected, show me how. And one of the issues was the family couldn't afford him. He was old enough to go out to work. The judge didn't want to hear about it. He said, that's a socioeconomic issue for your country. That's not abandonment. That's not abuse. Everybody in your country probably has the same issue.
Right.
And didn't want to hear any of it. So each case we have to look at on a case-by-case basis, but also we have to deal with the judges that were before.
Oh, I see.
So there's a lot of issues, but technically, Carrie's right. If they can't afford you, and that happens in all countries, this country as well,
Right.
and they're going to neglect you and you can't go to school and you're still of school age,
Right.
this is an issue.
Right.
But if you're 18 and they can't afford you anymore, you know what? In this country, you're emancipated. So trying to come over and say, I finished high school, I wanted to go to college, but my family couldn't afford it, that's a weak case for most of the judges. But you may get a bleeding heart liberal judge that would grant it.
Gotcha.
I want to, if you don't mind, Simon, I
Sure.
want to still talk about fraud, but put it in a different light.
Okay.
I'm only doing this 20-some odd years, and we've seen all kinds of scenarios.
20 years is not a sum. It's long years.
I was saying it kind of sarcastically, but I've seen a lot of situations where somebody comes here, they came with their picture and somebody else's passport, they got stopped at the airport, they claimed political asylum, they lost, they weren't deported, they modified their name slightly, and their date of birth slightly, and then they married somebody.
I see.
That didn't work out.
Okay.
Then eventually they got a green card in their real name by marriage to somebody in a real marriage, but they forgot to mention the whole history.
Okay.
And they've lived here for a long time. Okay. That's fraud. And there was a lot of that fraud in the 90s, a lot of it.
Right.
It wasn't typically prosecuted criminally.
Uh-huh.
Today, it is. That's why this conversation about the amount of fraud with the
Whites
special...
today, like whites now.
Well, I think it's, there's a scrutiny on everything that's happening immigration-wise. And and so that's number one. So if you committed fraud years ago, that still may come back to haunt you for immigration purposes. What's happening now, someone travels and they take all your prints now when you come back on your green card, and your asylum case in a different name from 1995 now pops up. All of a sudden there's a problem. It didn't pop up before because the system wasn't that sophisticated before, so you were able to travel every year back home. But now this year when you came back, wow, you spent 5 or 6 hours with Customs and Border Protection at the airport. They took your green card, and now they sent you up for a removal case. Or it comes up when people file for naturalization. They revisit your whole history and do a more sophisticated investigation. Okay.
And as well, we've even had people who've already naturalized, and this has happened to when they came back through the border.
Yes, that's correct.
So you're not safe just because you naturalized and you committed all this fraud.
What if somebody...
The federal government could still come after you because your application for passports and your applications for naturalization, you are certifying everything in that application is truthful. And they can come back and say, you've lied on it, you've committed a crime.
Is there any chance for the people who's been, got citizenship?
Yeah, so let's just talk about the immigration fraud for a little bit.
Okay.
They're usually not prosecuted for the old fraud. And there is a 10-year statute of limitations. If you did it in 1997, you're not going to be prosecuted today. But it could prevent you from naturalizing. It could, when you try to naturalize, have you get placed in removal proceedings. And there is generally a remedy. There's generally a way to fix it. You can come clean. There's waivers available, especially if you've been a hardworking person, you raised your family, like a lot of our Bangladeshi clients. They're really just hardworking,
Right.
family-oriented people. There's excellent waivers available in those circumstances. But citizenship fraud, when you do that naturalization application, you have to answer, have you ever used any other name?
Absolutely right.
They will prosecute those cases, and there is a 10-year statute of limitations.
Wow.
And it was a very famous case about 6 months ago of this. She was Dominican-born, and she became a New York State Assembly person.
That was last year, yeah.
It was last year.
Okay.
And she got her citizenship like 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay.
She did a bankruptcy case where she failed to reveal income from her husband. And when they started looking at the husband, they realized that she got her green card through fraud.
Wow.
Now, they couldn't prosecute her for the green card fraud. That was a long time ago. But they could prosecute her. She was within the 10 years on the naturalization application.
Wow.
And this woman lost everything. She had to step down from the state assembly. Her life was ruined. So, 2 points with all of this. The first is, if you're involved in some fraud, some misrepresentation today, no matter how small,
You will get caught.
you need to really reflect. Stop. Don't continue it.
Right.
Or get a consultation. Secondly, if you did something years ago, there's probably a way to fix it today. Probably. But if there's no way, you ought to find out about that.
Right.
Because over and over we see these cases, and it's not just Southeast Asia, it's all over. We see these cases where folks did a couple of things. You know, they tried to do a LULAC case, they tried to do this, and then they got their green card, but they got it by not telling the truth on the applications. And now that stuff is coming back to haunt them.
So past really matters.
Yes.
It is. I'm just going to summarize it. What
Okay.
we talked about, it's very interesting. I just let my audience know that what we talked about. দর্শক, আমরা কথা বলছিলাম জুভেনাইল ভিসা নিয়ে। জুভেনাইল ভিসা হচ্ছে গিয়ে যাদের বয়স 21 বছরের নিচে এবং 18 বছরের নিচে, বেসিক্যালি যাদের বাবা অথবা মার কাছ থেকে যারা অ্যাবিউজড অথবা নেগলেক্টেড অথবা বেসিক্যালি যেটা হচ্ছে আপনার তাদেরকে কেউ টেক কেয়ার করার মতো নাই, তারা যেভাবেই আসুক না কেন এই আমেরিকায়, ওয়েদার লিগ্যাল ওয়েতে অথবা ইলিগ্যাল ওয়েতে, তারা চাইলে গ্রিন কার্ডের জন্য অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করতে পারে। তো কিছু ব্যাপার আছে এখানে, যদিও সম্পূর্ণ কথা এখানে বলা সম্ভব না। তো আপনারা যদি চান ডিটেলসে জানতে অথবা আলাপ করতে, সেক্ষেত্রে আপনি আমাদের এই যে লয়ার আছে ব্রেটস কোভেন থেকে, মিস্টার ক্যারি অ্যান্ড মিস আইলিন, তাদের সাথে আপনারা ডিসকাস করতে পারেন। তো আমি যেটা বলতে চাচ্ছিলাম যে এই যারা এই জুভেনাইল ভিসার জন্য আবেদন করতে চান অথবা অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করতে চান, তাদের বয়স 21-এর নিচে হতে হবে। তো এখানে অনেক ব্যাপার আছে, যেটা হচ্ছে কিনে যে কিছু জিনিস, যে পাস্ট হিস্টোরি যদি থাকে কারো, সব কিছু মেনশন করতে হবে। বিকজ কারণ হচ্ছে যদি কোনো কিছু এখানে লুকোনো থাকে, সেক্ষেত্রে সেটা ফিউচারে এটা খারাপ নিয়ে আসতে পারে। সেক্ষেত্রে আপনার ইমিগ্রেশন স্ট্যাটাসকে সম্পূর্ণ বাতিল করে দিতে পারে। তো দর্শক, আমরা একটা কল নিব শামিমা, নিউ ইয়র্ক থেকে।
Yes, hi.
হাই।
I applied for my brother on 2006,
Okay.
and I got approval on 2007. And
Okay.
2008, my brother has a baby. So, what I supposed to submit, like a birth document, the proof of birth certificate or passport, what? Do I need to submit anything?
So you got applied for 2007. You applied
I applied for 2006, and approval I got on 2007.
on
And
2000
my brother have a baby on 2008.
on 2000. Okay. Did you get the question?
Yeah, so not a problem. I think they're
Okay,
doing-
we got you.
yeah.
Thank you. শামিমা, আপনি কল করার জন্য।
This is a fourth preference petition. They're up to now what?
2002.
Went into it like, is it June of 2002, April of
Yeah.
2? Yeah.
2000.
So they're now doing cases in that preference, the brother-sister preference, which is called the fourth preference.
Fourth.
For cases that were have a priority date of June of 2002. Her priority date is not the approval date, it's the date she filed. So it's 2007.
2006.
2006. So she's, you know, at least a couple of years away.
The question is now, because the beneficiary now has a child.
Right.
Yes.
Derivative beneficiary. They can do that at the time at the consulate. By the time he goes for his interview, and several years from now, he may have a second child, and they could do it all at one time.
Yeah, so
But
all the children will join with them as long as the kids are under 21 at the time. And even if they're older than 21, there are some exceptions. But these kids, this child will definitely be what's called a derivative beneficiary on that application. Some people believe that they should notify immigration now of that, and you're welcome to do that. There's no problem. But you don't have to. You can still do it at the consulate.
I see. Okay. Shamima, I hope you got your answer. Carrie, we were talking about juvenile visa. What are the risks?
There's really no risk at all for people filing for juvenile visas unless they're committing some kind of fraud. If it's denied, it's denied. But most people filing for these are doing it defensively because they're already in removal proceedings. They were caught crossing the border, and they have a removal proceeding going on. So the immigration judges, at least here in New York and in New Jersey, have been fairly reasonable in taking those cases slow in immigration court to give them time to get the prerequisites from family court. But anybody who's filing anything today that doesn't have a criminal history, didn't come here after November 20th of last year, and doesn't have a deportation order after January of last year, they are in the lowest priority for deportation, and they're just not being targeted for deportation.
Okay.
If you happen to be in priority 1 or priority 2, which includes DWIs, driving while intoxicated,
right,
some very minor misdemeanors, and some very serious crimes too, then your risk for deportation is very high. So somebody who's been here for 25 years, has a deportation order from 2000,
right,
lives with his family, he's not getting deported. Even if he walked into 26 Federal Plaza and said, hey, I got a deportation order, I want to be deported, they would laugh and walk the person outside. That's the deal today, unless they caught a DWI. They would then move into a higher category. Unless they caught other certain criminal history, which I'm happy to elaborate on, they would move into the other category. The only exception to these criminal issues is if they came here after November 20th of this year. That's in
this year.
Last year. 2014.
Okay.
That's a high priority. And if they got a deportation order after January 1st of 2014, they're also in a high priority.
I see.
Everybody else is not.
Everybody is not. Gotcha.
And that's good news.
That's good news. That's really good news. I just wanted to give some information regarding this to your audience. দর্শক, আমরা কথা বললাম হচ্ছে গিয়ে যে ডিপোর্টেশন নিয়ে কিছু ব্যাপারে, যেটা কিনা জুভেনাইল ভিসা অবভিয়াসলি। তো দর্শক, এই ব্যাপারে আপনারা যদি বিস্তারিতভাবে আলাপ করতে চান, যদিও এই অনুষ্ঠানের মাধ্যমে আলাপ করা অথবা ইনফরমেশন দেওয়া অসম্ভব, তো সেই ক্ষেত্রে আপনারা আমাদের এই লয়ারের কাছে যোগাযোগ করতে পারেন। তাদের অ্যাড্রেসটি আপনারা আমাদের সিনে বাংলার পর্দায় দেখতে পাচ্ছেন। তাদের টেলিফোন নাম্বারটি দেওয়া আছে, আপনারা টেলিফোন নাম্বার তারা যোগাযোগ করতে পারেন। সেক্ষেত্রে তাদের সাথে আপনারা এই জুভেনাইল ভিসা অথবা অন্যান্য ইমিগ্রেশন কোনো বিষয় নিয়ে আপনারা আলাপ করতে পারেন। আপনাদের যে কোনো প্রশ্নের উত্তর তারা দিয়ে থাকবে, এবং ফার্স্ট কনসালটেন্সি তাদের হচ্ছে সিনে বাংলার পক্ষ থেকে ফ্রি। সেক্ষেত্রে আপনারা নিশ্চিত আমাদের এই অনুষ্ঠানের মাধ্যমে তাদেরকে জানাবেন। তো দর্শক, আপনাদের যে কোনো ইমিগ্রেশন প্রশ্ন থাকলে আমাদেরকে করতে পারেন এই নাম্বারে 718-389-9600 আজকের এই অনুষ্ঠানে। দর্শক, Mr. Carey, Eileen, we know pretty much about the benefit and risks. What else you can tell us about juvenile visa? Anything important? Anything audience should know, be aware of?
Just of the timeline, you know, I mean, family courts, depending on the borough that they're in, can take a very long period of time. And if you're coming close to being 21, you got to push the family court because timing is everything.
Do
It really
they,
is.
since you do more of these in the office than I do, so let me ask you a question if you don't mind. Do they always conduct a home study on the guardian?
Yes.
Always. So the guardian also has to be fit, right? The guardian has to be fingerprinted to make sure
Yeah.
you're not a sexual predator or that
No
kind
one
of
in the
thing.
house is. So it's
Right.
not just, it's the adults in the house have to get fingerprinted.
Now, I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyhow. Does the guardian have to have legal status in the U.S.?
That's what I was going to ask.
No, they don't. That's not part of it.
Even though they're illegal.
That's
They
correct.
can be illegal as long as they're not a danger to the child. So they have to make sure if they have a criminal history, they may or may not, depending on what the criminal history is. So if they got a disorderly conduct, they'll probably still be okay. But if they have a drug offense or sexual abuse offense, they're going to be denied as a guardian.
Yeah,
Okay.
so we did a case, and I think they were Indian. I can't remember. This was about 2 or 3 years ago, where the older brother was here. I'm guessing about the age. The older brother was maybe 28 or 29, no status, and the younger brother was like 15. And the younger brother got here, and the court made the special finding and awarded guardianship to the older brother, and the younger brother got a green card.
Yep. That will happen.
Now, one of the things you cannot do after you get your green card and become a citizen is you can't petition for your parents. You can't say your parents abandoned you, and then 5 years later petition for them.
And that includes, even though you're saying only one parent abandoned you, you can't file for either parent.
Oh, I see. I see.
And we have
Because
had,
one parent can be the guardian.
Right.
Because it's only, the requirement is only one parent abandoned,
What if-
abused, or neglected you, but you can never petition even for that guardian parent.
What if the child is adopted from overseas, let's say?
Okay,
It's-
well, now we're changing it. So whether you're adopted or you're not adopted,
if we're
you've been-
adopted, let's say that child has been adopted. They
In
don't
the
have it-
US.
In the U.S.
well, that's a whole different story. You wouldn't
Well,
necessarily need to do
it
that.
doesn't impact whether or not you can go for SIJ. So the child could have been adopted in the United States, and the United States parent adopted them when they were 16. So they can't petition for them because they're not their child under the immigration laws. If they were abandoned, abused, or neglected by their biological parents, they could still apply for SIJ, even though they've been adopted in the U.S. The adoptive parent becomes the guardian. We had a couple of cases like that.
So just for clarification, some people can acquire residency through adoption, but the rules are different than they are for special immigrant juvenile visa. So, and they're complicated, and Eileen does a lot of those cases. But if you were adopted, whether it was by an American citizen or by a Bangladesh citizen, that doesn't affect your ability to do a special immigrant juvenile visa. And that's really it. But basically the rules, maybe we should switch gears and talk about the rules for adoption.
Sure.
Okay, so since you are
So let's say
in the office?
as long as you've adopted a child by the age of 16, immigration will recognize you as the parent.
I see.
Okay? If the adoption occurs after the age of 16, immigration does not recognize you as the parent for immigration
So it has
purposes.
to be before 16.
Right. Which is very interesting because a step-parent just marrying one of the parents
Right.
is okay as long as it was done before the child's 18.
I see.
And then the step-parent could petition for a child. But an adoptive parent, the adoption has to take place before they're 16.
Okay.
Adoptions are trickier because most of the time the rule requires that you live with a child for 2 years and that you had custody of the child for 2 years. So there's the residency requirement and the custody requirement. If you do an orphan petition, it's quite different.
Eileen, I'm going to interrupt you
adoption
for a
is
second. If I'm
very,
going to take a
very-
call.
Sure,
Before I do that, I'm just going to explain what we talked about.
sure. You don't need to tell me.
সো দর্শক আমরা কথা বলছিলাম জুভেনাইল ভিসা নিয়ে এগেন যেখানে কেউ যদি অ্যাডাপশন করে থাকেন ছেলে অথবা মেয়ে যদি তারা 16 বছরের 16 বছরের আগে যদি হয় তাহলে তাদের ওদের ব্যাপারে আপনারা জুভেনাইল ভিসার জন্য অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করতে পারবেন। বাট যদি তারা 16 পার হয়ে যায় অথবা 16 হয়ে যায় তাহলে সেক্ষেত্রে সম্ভব না। আমাদের সাথে আছেন কেয়া, নিউ ইয়র্ক থেকে। কেয়া,
হ্যালো।
জি আপনার প্রশ্নটি বলুন।
জি ভাই, আসসালামু আলাইকুম।
ওয়ালাইকুম সালাম।
আমি জানতে চাচ্ছি আমার আম্মা এখান থেকে গ্রিন কার্ড হোল্ডার।
আচ্ছা।
আমার একটা ভাইয়ের জন্য অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করছিল, ওনার বয়স ছিল সেই সময় 18 বছর।
কোন সময়, কোন ইয়ারে?
মানে 2003 সালে, মানে 2003-তে আমার আম্মার হাতে অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করছিল, কিন্তু দেখা যাচ্ছে ওনারা ডাকতে, মানে আমার ছোট ভাইটা চলে আসছে, কিন্তু ছোটটা বড়টা আসে নাই। হ্যাঁ, কারণ ও মানে 11 বছর হয়ে গেছে। 11 মানে যেখানে 3 বছর লাগে সেখানে 11 বছর হয়ে গেছে।
আপু আপনার কথা,
উনি বিয়ে করে ফেলতে, বুঝছেন?
আচ্ছা, আপনার কথাটা একটু কনফিউশন। সেটা হচ্ছে যে আপনার মা ওনার ছেলের জন্য অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করেছে এবং তার এবং 3টা ছেলে আছে, সেটা বলতে চাচ্ছেন তো?
জি।
এবং আচ্ছা, এটা আপনার আম্মা যে তার ছেলের জন্য অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করেছিল সেটা কোন ইয়ারে? 2003-তে?
2003-তে।
আচ্ছা।
কিন্তু দেখা যাচ্ছে আমার ছোট ভাইটা মানে 3 বছর লাগার কথা, সেখানে 6 বছর পরে আসছে। তার বড়টা হচ্ছে আসতেই পারি না, বুঝছেন? কিন্তু দেখা যাচ্ছে 11 বছর হয়ে গেছে। হ্যাঁ, মানে গ্রিন কার্ডধারী মা তো 21-এ বাচ্চারা অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করলে আসতে পারে 3 বছরের ভিতরে, কিন্তু ওনারা ডাকতে ভুল করছে, মানে লেট করছে। এই কারণেই দেখা যাচ্ছে আমার ভাইটা আসতে পারি নাই। হ্যাঁ, 3 বছর পার হয়ে গেছে, কিন্তু 11 বছর পরে উনি বিয়ে করে ফেলতে, বুঝছেন? সে সময় ওনার ডাকছে। হ্যাঁ, ডাকছে, কিন্তু বিয়ে করছে, ওরা জানতে পেরেছে যে উনি বিয়ে করে ফেলছে। তারপরে আমার আম্মা সরি বলে হচ্ছে এই করছে, আবার অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করছে যে সরি, দেখো আমার ছেলে বিয়ে করে ফেলছে, কিন্তু আমি হচ্ছে পুনরায় আবার হচ্ছে এই করতে চাই। কিন্তু আমার আব্বা সিটিজেন, উনি অ্যাপ্লাই করছে। হ্যাঁ, আবার পুনরায়, মানে
আপনার আম্মা যখন অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করেছিল 2003-তে তখন ওনার গ্রিন কার্ড ছিল।
জি।
এবং আপনার আপনার সেই ভাইয়ের বয়স তখন কত ছিল?
সেই সময় ছিল ওর বয়স 18 বছর।
18 বছর ছিল তখন।
জি।
আচ্ছা, তো সেইখানে তারা যেহেতু আপনার আম্মা গ্রিন কার্ড ধারী ছিল, তখন আপনি বলতে যাচ্ছেন 3 বছরের মাথায় না ডেকে ওনারা 11 বছরের মাথায় ডেকেছেন ওনাকে।
জি।
আচ্ছা, তো সেই ক্ষেত্রে আপনি বলতে যাচ্ছেন এখন যে তারা ওই কেসটাকে তারা ডিনাই করে দিয়েছে, সেটা অ্যাপ্রুভ করেনি,
যেহেতু বিয়ে করছে ডিনাই করে দিয়েছে, বুঝছেন?
আচ্ছা, সেক্ষেত্রে সেক্ষেত্রে তারা এই কেসটা আপনাকে নেননি। এই তো আপনার প্রশ্নটি?
জি। কিন্তু আমার আব্বা অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করছে আবার পুনরায়, মানে অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করার 4 মাস হলো।
আচ্ছা।
কিন্তু কোনো কিছু পুরো পাইছে, অ্যাপ্লিকেশন পেপার পাইছে, কিন্তু কোনো কিছু করে নাই।
অ্যাপ্লিকেশন সেটা কবে করেছেন উনি?
4 মাস আগে, নভেম্বর মাসে করছি।
আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে, ধন্যবাদ। আপনি আমাদের সাথে থাকুন, আমরা চেষ্টা করছি আইলিন এবং ব্রেটসের কাছ থেকে আপনার প্রশ্নটির অ্যান্সার নিতে। ঠিক আছে আপু? Eileen, Bretz, her mother she had a green card in 2003, and she applied for her son, which he was 18 years old at that time in 2003. So they're expecting that after a couple of years, it will take a couple of years, let's say 3 or 4 years, but they didn't call him. But since he's 18 years old, they're expecting that. They called him after 11 years, by the time he was married. And he has kids, 2 or 3 kids, I believe. So now when they called him, they says, oh, now he's married, so he's denied. We cannot accept this application. So that's one. Second thing is now his father is citizen. He applied for him a couple of months before. What can we do for him? I mean, for her.
So basically, at the time the mother petitioned for him, he was single, that was fine, she was a lawful permanent resident.
Right.
If on the day he was married, she had still been a lawful permanent resident and not become a U.S. citizen, the petition died. So all that time was wasted.
Wasted for her.
The father, yes, he can file a visa petition, he already has, which is great. But the processing time for petition married is 2004. I mean, this is an 11-year wait.
11.
Yeah, and he hadn't filed it before last year?
No. So there is no way to recall that case.
No, the only way is if it wasn't a civil marriage. If it was just a religious marriage,
Okay.
Without civil registry,
Right.
then technically he's still
I
single.
mean, obviously, because they denied it because of he was married, so they knew about it.
Yeah. Well, immigration is very funny. They say you have to be civilly married in order for them to recognize the marriage, but then on instances like this, they'll look at a religious marriage because there's 2 children and say, oh, no, you're married, so now you're not eligible. So he may have been able to fight it if he wasn't civilly married. But if he did civilly marry, then no.
Then no.
He needed to wait for his mother to become a citizen before he married.
Before he married.
Did his mother ever become a citizen?
Well, probably she is now. I forgot to ask her that, but
Yeah.
you know, 2003 she had a green card, so that time she applied for it. So দর্শক আপনার যে প্রশ্নটি ছিল যে সরি আপনার এই যে উনি যে 2003-তে যে অ্যাপ্লিকেশনটা করেছেন সেটা আসলে সম্ভব ছিল না ইমিগ্রেশন অফিসে, বিকজ উনি বিয়ে করার কারণে উনি আসলে ওনারা কেসটা অ্যাপ্রুভ হয়নি। তো সেই ক্ষেত্রে আপনারা এখন যে আপনার বাবা যে অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করেছেন সেটার উপরেই নির্ভর থাকতে হবে এবং সেটা about 10 to 11 years লাগবে। এই আর তার এরপর যদি আপনার যদি কোনো ধরনের প্রশ্ন থাকে আপনি অবশ্যই আমাদের এই ইমিগ্রেশন লয়ারদের সাথে যোগাযোগ করতে পারেন এবং তাদের অফিসের নাম্বারটি আপনারা স্ক্রিনে আমাদের স্ক্রিনে দেখতে পাচ্ছেন এবং অ্যাড্রেসটিও দেওয়া আছে। সেক্ষেত্রে আপনি তারা চাইলে আপনি তাদের সাথে ডিটেলসে তাদের সাথে আলাপ করতে পারেন। Any tips for the day today?
Yeah, so since we were talking about fraud, very simple. Don't commit fraud. Don't lie in court. Don't commit fraud. If you are better off in the United States saying nothing than saying a lie under oath.
Anything that's not true is a fraud. Okay,
Right.
and let's break it down to make, because people are going to say, oh, well, that really wasn't so bad.
Right.
If you gave a name that's not yours, it's fraud.
Right.
If you gave a date of birth that's not yours, it's fraud. If you gave an address that you never lived at, it's fraud.
Right.
They may seem simple and minor to you, or to the audience, I should say.
Right.
But it's not.
They are not.
It's a fraud. It's a misrepresentation, and because of it, you may need a waiver.
Right.
Now, if you are finally eligible for relief, it's in your own name, you are going to go for a waiver. Reveal all of your frauds.
Right.
Yeah, most of the time with immigration, there is a solution for all the mistakes you made beforehand. And it's really important to get the right advice, because coming clean,
Right.
you're going to get it all behind you. You're still probably going to be able to get what you're looking for, and you're going to sleep at night.
Sleep with the
That's the tip
peace.
for the day.
for the
Don't
day.
commit fraud.
Don't commit fraud,
fraud.
and if you did and you have a chance
It
to
doesn't
waive
matter.
it,
It's a small
reveal
or big.
it all.
Big, no way. If it's small, you should.
If it's not true, it's a fraud.
Fraud.
It's a misrepresentation.
Right. It should be. দর্শক
You don't
আপনার
need to have been arrested for it. You don't need to be convicted for it. You
Absolutely.
just need to have done it. And lying to an immigration officer, as white of a lie as you might think it is, it's a fraud.
it's a fraud. Is there anything you want to add to Carrie?
I think
Pretty much
we
covered
had
it,
we had a
everything?
Red,
pretty
white,
good
and blue
show.
frauds are also count.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
দর্শক আমরা যে কথা বলছিলাম অ্যাজ ইউজুয়াল জুভেনাইল ভিসা নিয়ে, তো সেই ক্ষেত্রে কোনো ধরনের যদি ফ্রড আপনারা করে থাকেন অবশ্যই সেটা মেনশন করতে হবে অ্যাপ্লিকেশনের সময়। এবং ফ্রড তো ফ্রডই, তো সেটার ক্ষেত্রে কোনো অল্টারনেটিভ নাই। যে ইমিগ্রেশন অফিসের কাছে কোনো ধরনের মিথ্যা অথবা ফ্রড অ্যাকসেপ্টেবল নয়। তো সেক্ষেত্রে আপনারা যেটা সত্য সেটাই আপনারা দেবেন। যদি কেউ যদি কোনো অ্যাড্রেসে না থেকে থাকেন, বসবাস করে থাকেন, সেক্ষেত্রে আপনি যদি মেনশন করেন যে আমি ওই অ্যাড্রেসে কোনো এক সময় ছিলাম অথবা থাকতাম, সেটা তো অবভিয়াসলি ফ্রড। এই ধরনের ছোটো ছোটো মিস্টেক আমরা অনেকেই করে থাকি। তো আমরা যাতে না করি এই ধরনের মিস্টেকগুলো, সেক্ষেত্রে ফিউচারের জন্য ভালো ইমিগ্রেশন অ্যাপ্লিকেশনের জন্য। Carrie, thank you for coming in today.
Salman, thank you for sitting in for Shamina. I think you do a great job.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Eileen,
Thank
for
you.
coming in today. দর্শক, আজকে আমরা এখানেই বিদায় নিচ্ছি। দেখা হবে আগামী সপ্তাহে। সে পর্যন্ত ভালো থাকুন, সুস্থ থাকুন।
বাবজান দেখো কত বড় বাড়ি।
এখন থেকে আমার বাবজান ডাকবা না।
বাপেরে বাপ ডাকবো না তো কি ডাকবো? খালু।